Good day, everyone. This is Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37, episode number 4. On this episode, I'll review episode number 4 of the Amazing Race Season 37. The racers were off to Indonesia, having had a good time in Japan, and they faced a new twist on the show, the driver's seat. Let's find out what that's all about. I'm your host, Jason Mogul. With 10 teams left, after Courtney and Jasmine were eliminated in Leg 3, I consider the teams to be running in 3 groups. The top group of Jonathan and Anna, Scott and Lori, and Carson and Jack have had consistently good performances so far and seem to be the strongest teams. Even after equalizers, they were able to make their way to the front. The slowest group, who consistently seem to trail the others, are Bernie and Kerrigan, Han and Holden, and Nick and Mike. Try as they might, they just can't seem to break free and join the others. The rest of the teams fall in the middle pack with good performances. At the start of this leg, Lori and Scott left the pit stop first at 1:45 a.m. Yep, that's right, 1:45 a.m. Remember in the old days when teams headed to the pit stop? Phil would say it was for a mandatory 12-hour rest period, to eat, to sleep, and socialize with the other teams. He doesn't say that anymore, perhaps because fans already know that after 36 seasons. But I wonder if it's still a minimum of 12 hours. And do the teams still socialize with one another? What does this have to do with the show? Not much, but I do like to speculate on what happens that you don't see on camera. Anyway, right behind Lori and Scott were Carson and Jack, just 3 minutes later. They headed to a travel agency to get tickets to Bali, Indonesia. Not just a travel agency, but a discount travel agency. Whenever teams need airline tickets, I like to watch and see where the teams buy their tickets. From a strategic point of view, I like to see if I can figure out their thought process for the best ways to get tickets. Do they get them from a public computer? Or by using someone else's phone? Or wait and get them at the airport? Or do they get them by using a travel agency? In this case, it seems, although we don't get to see the clue, that all teams were instructed to go to the same travel agency. Why? Perhaps it's because all other options were closed that late at night. In any case, all teams made their way to the same agency, and one by one, wanted tickets on the same flight as those Scott and Lori obtained, leaving at 7:15 a.m. The time gap between the first place team, Scott and Lori, and the last place team, Bernie and Kerrigan, was nearly 4 hours. In the end, 9 teams made it on the same flight at 7:15, but because Bernie and Kerrigan left last, they were not able to obtain seats on the same flight as the others. They just ran out of time. They were told there was no way they could get tickets, get to the airport, and check in time to make the flight, and they accepted that without much of a fight. Therefore, they had to settle for a flight that left at 10:55 a.m., about 3.5 hours behind all the others. The insight here is that the airport acted like an equalizer for all teams, except Bernie and Kerrigan. The time advantage, just over 3 hours, that Scott and Lori had on those teams disappeared at the airport. Like Han and Holden on the previous leg, Bernie and Kerrigan had a tough challenge to catch up to all the others. As teams gathered at the airport, discussions were already underway about the driver's seat roadblock, the drama starting to build. How would teams handle the decision on who gets less work and who would get more work? Scott and Lori were especially concerned how they'd fare if they were not first. In fact, Scott shared his thoughts openly with Carson and Jack, which I thought was not particularly smart. I mean, I like to study previous seasons, review possible strategies, and then come up with what I might have done in that same situation. At the airport, Scott was saying that if a team uses a weapon, we'll call it, like the driver's seat, to push another team out of the race, then it has to result in the elimination of that team. If not, the affected team may be able to survive, and then they most likely would be upset and then try to seek revenge. I agree with that thought process 100%. It has been true on The Amazing Race since Season 1. But I don't agree with sharing those thoughts out loud with another team. I say, keep that to yourself, or share them only with the audience by breaking the fourth wall, out of earshot of other teams. I don't consider it good strategy to share your strategy with other teams. They could use it against you later. I do believe that during the long stretch between leg 1 and the final 3, when teams are eliminated one by one, is a time to play nice with the other teams. But not too nice. Be social, but not blabbing your inner thoughts to other teams. Okay, back to the race. The first flight with 9 teams arrived in Bali at 4:40 p.m. and made their way by taxi to a Hindu temple. Bernie and Kerrigan landed at 8:50 p.m. Once there, teams learned the clue would not be available until sunrise the next morning. Each team took a number based on their arrival order. While still in last place, this allowed Bernie and Kerrigan to catch up with the others. The next morning, we see the racers gathered at the temple, ready to start the day. Wait, what? What happened to them during the night? Did they sleep on the ground at the temple? Did they get hotel rooms? Did they eat? This just wasn't shown, and they kind of jumped over that part. To get their next clue, racers had to ride ATVs, one team per ATV, through mud and a long tunnel, and then to a waterfall, where they found their next clue. They left in order based on the number they had picked the night before, at a time interval between the teams. It was a fun way to see Bali, riding along, seeing the jungle. That did look like a lot of fun. Jonathan and Anna left first. Because of the timed intervals between teams and the narrow pathway, there was little opportunity for teams to pass one another, so they got their clue in the order they left. One item of note was that Nick and Mike and Han and Holden had moved up in placement from where they had been at the start of the leg. Instead of being at the back of the pack, Nick and Mike had moved up to second, and Han and Holden moved up to fourth. Could that be the break they needed? On the other hand, Carson and Jack started the leg in second, but moved back to ninth at this point in the leg. Quite a turnaround for those 3 teams. Along the way, Erica commented about how well her and her mom were getting along, with little or no bickering. I sense that perhaps we just might see some bickering between themselves in the future, as if they just jinxed themselves for saying that out loud. Like in football when the announcers say that a field goal kicker hasn't missed all season, only for us to see him miss on the very next attempt. It happened to me when I bragged about how reliable my pickup truck has been, only to have the coolant hose burst the very next time I drove it, stranding us far from home. It's funny how we say we are not superstitious, but really are. Knock on wood. The clue at the waterfall contained route information to a rice field, where they would face the driver's seat. Teams took taxis to the rice field, and off they went. At this point in the show, I was reminded of something. One thing I find funny is when teams try to motivate the taxi driver by telling them they are in a race for $1 million. We've heard that over and over in past seasons. But do taxi drivers really care? Do they really have any concept of how much $1 million is? If I jumped in a taxi and said, "Go fast so I can win $1 million," would that really motivate the driver? I don't think so. Over the years, we've seen many ways racers try to motivate taxi drivers, some by negative means, but the best way I've seen racers motivate taxi drivers is to make them feel like they're part of the team. It's free, and who doesn't like to be on a winning team? Anyway, Jonathan and Anna were the first to arrive at the rice fields, and therefore were in the driver's seat. The roadblock, rice to the occasion, a real groaner of a pun, by the way, which I love, required a team member to thresh stalks of rice until they had the required amount of rice grains. Jonathan and Anna, being in the driver's seat, decided how much rice each team had to obtain, either 15, 20, or 25 pounds of it. So the question was, how to decide the weight to assign to each team. The more weight, the longer it took. 2 teams would be assigned 15 pounds, 3 teams would get assigned 20 pounds, and 5 teams would get 25 pounds. There were several strategies to consider here. One strategy could be to assign the 25 pounds to the perceived strongest teams, regardless of where they were at that point in the race, to try to push them back in the pack and be less of a threat. Another could be to assign the 25 pounds to the perceived weakest teams to try to get them eliminated. A third strategy, which isn't really a strategy in my mind, is to assign the 25 pounds to teams you just don't like, out of spite, to get revenge for some past injustice. But what Jonathan and Anna decided to do was to assign the 25 pounds to the teams immediately following them, which I thought was a non-emotional way to decide. And after realizing they forgot to include themselves, they switched weights and gave Bernie and Kerrigan 25 pounds and gave themselves 15. Once Anna saw the task, however, they decided to use their express pass and skip it all together. The clue directed them to a detour, and they left to find it. Here's another ramification of their weight choices. By assigning 15 pounds to themselves and not to another team, and then not even doing the task, they forego the opportunity to make the load lighter for one team. A team that got either 20 or 25 pounds assigned to them could have had either 5 or 10 pounds less if Jonathan and Anna had assigned 25 pounds to themselves. They doled out the maximum punishment, so to speak. And it seemed an odd place to use the express pass, but I gathered they wanted to keep their first place position. I'm sure you have an opinion about that too. It will be interesting to see if that was the right decision in the future. But at this point, it did seem like they squandered it for a little gain. I believe Jonathan and Anna's desire of coming in first on every leg, no matter the cost, may hurt them in the future. Here's why. Jonathan realized the negative aspect of being in the driver's seat. By having the responsibility of assigning the weights, some teams would not be happy with them and perhaps seek revenge, which is not something teams need during the race. Enemies. No matter which strategy they use to decide the weight assignments, someone would be upset. So, I was thinking that yet another strategy could be, for the first team to arrive at the driver's seat, let the second team pass them in exchange for a 15-pound weight. The second team might think it's a good idea and accept, but that would also give the second team the job of assigning weights, and some teams would be upset with them. The first team might give up some time, but they avoid being perceived as being bad. We saw that Lori was upset when she was assigned 25 pounds, believing that they would be spared the higher amount because they felt close to Jonathan and Anna. But she didn't realize Jonathan and Anna didn't assign weights based on who they liked or disliked. It was a practical decision to slow teams right behind them, regardless of who they were. Will Scott and Lori seek revenge on Jonathan and Anna for that decision? We will see. Meanwhile, Brett and Mark ran into a problem when their taxi driver went to the wrong place, and when they realized it, they were 43 minutes away. That could spell trouble. All teams arrived and threshed rice. The last team to arrive was Brett and Mark. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Anna arrived at the detour. It was a choice between making a decorated long bamboo pole, penjur, or making a fruit offering, bajagan, which also involved buying the offering items at local vendors after memorizing the contents. There was a sign by the clue box that showed the direction to each task. Jonathan had to go to the bathroom and could not function well until he did. This slowed them down at the task. Scott and Lori arrived shortly after, and it seems the express pass was indeed squandered. Back at the rice field, Kerrigan gingerly threshed her rice stalks, looking around at others as she did it. Jeff, on the other hand, grabbed huge tree trunk-sized bundles and threshed wildly. Did you notice the woman passing out the next clue? She was a hugger. As teams finished, she was all into giving enthusiastic hugs to the racers. She made the most out of her time on camera. Brett and Mark finished the task and passed Bernie and Kerrigan at the rice roadblock, overcoming their 43-minute setback of poor navigation. When Alyssa and Josiah arrived at the detour, they selected Penjur, but she said there's no way to know how to get there. As the camera zooms in to reveal the direction sign right above their heads. Another funny moment. Teams got a kick out of Scott and Lori's passionate argument on how to build the Pendure, while Jonathan and Anna failed on their first attempt, and Nick and Mike and Han and Holden worked together on the Pajagan. Bernie and Kerrigan wandered around trying to find the detour site. I noticed Bernie was carrying all the bags, and Kerrigan had none. Frustration was increasing between them. As teams finished their tasks, several followed each other on the way to the pit stop, just trusting Nick and Mike, who were in front. The three teams took a wrong turn, ran in a huge circle, and ended up right back where they'd started. But Melinda and Erica did their own navigating, took the right path, allowing them to pass those three teams. At the pit stop, Jonathan and Anna were able to maintain first place. Carson and Jack came in second, and Scott and Lori finished third. They remain as the strongest team so far. Bernie and Kerrigan, however, came in last and were eliminated. In a post-pit stop interview, they argued again, going over the same ground they argued about in the past, their communication and decision-making process. It seemed to me they gave up on the race at the Rice Detour, believing there was no chance, and just checked out mentally. But what was interesting to me was that while Bernie and Kerrigan came in last, Nick and Mike and Han and Holden improved their positions and were not at the back of the pack anymore. So this changes the grouping, in my opinion. Instead of 3 groups, it's now down to 2. The first being the top 3 strongest teams, and the second is everyone else. After 4 legs, there are no bottom-of-the-pack teams at this point. With the introduction of the driver's seat, we saw the first real opportunity in this race for some serious strategic thinking. While on the surface, being in the driver's seat looks like a good thing, there is another side to that coin, as I discussed earlier. At the pit stop mat, teams question that and have formed some negative opinions of other teams. Some teams are not liking Jonathan and Anna so much for their decisions at the driver's seat, and some are not liking Lori and Scott for their strong performances, yet simultaneous attempts to downplay their own skills. The thing that surprises me is that Carson and Jack, despite being as strong as those 2 teams, have so far escaped notice. They are still racing under the radar of the other teams. Looking ahead to the next episode, we'll see live U-turn voting, yet another new twist on the game. U-turns are another place where teams face some tough decisions that may affect the outcome of the race, and drama usually ensues. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks for listening, and join me next time for episode number 5 of Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37, and we'll examine this U-turn that's coming up. See you then.